2 Corinthians. So last year we finished 1 Corinthians, and this year we're going to be in 2 Corinthians. And next week we're going to start off in verse 1 all the way to verse 11, so the first half of chapter 1. Today we're going to give you an introductory sermon to try to get you familiar with 2 Corinthians. So this content is foundational for the stuff we're going to learn over the next 7 to 8 months. Round. Pop quiz. You ready for this? You will get something for answering this correct. This letter, I'm looking for a specific number, was likely written around AD what? 50-something. I'll give you a hint. 50-something. John? That's correct. Wow. I will give you something cool later. Okay? You get life points for now. So come talk to me. I'll give you something. All right. Now, after writing, listen. Okay, here we go. Here's some context. You guys, I need your thinking caps on for now, and then you can still have them on later, but not maybe as much. So this is going to be maybe some news for you. But we have 1 and 2 Corinthians. It's likely Paul wrote 4 letters to the Corinthian church, 2 of which we don't have, 2 of which are in the canon of Scripture. So let me give you some history here, some context. Okay, the first letter. After establishing the church in Corinth, a few years passed, and he wrote his first part of his first letter to the Corinthian church. And he references this in 1 Corinthians 5 and 9, where he said, I wrote to you in my letter. So that's the first letter, which we don't have. And then we get his second letter, which is 1 Corinthians. Okay, you following so far? So 1 Corinthians is actually his second letter. After writing 1 Corinthians, as we went, it's this loving, corrective letter. The church responded semi-well, but they didn't respond overly well, and so he made an emergency visit to the church in Corinth, and his visit was very challenging. He calls this a painful visit. Not a joyous, peaceful one, but a painful visit. And when he departed, the Corinthians and him were not on great terms, so their visit wasn't all that great. Rather than making another visit to them, he writes what we call a severe letter. 2 Corinthians 2:4 references this, and this is the third letter he wrote, which is not 2 Corinthians, it's the letter before this one. Then he got a report that the Corinthian church had done some things that Paul desired of them, and they made progress. However, what we're going to learn tonight is these false teachers called super apostles came onto the scene and started misleading the church away from the truth, away from Paul. People were enamored by them, all that sort of stuff. And so Paul is going to visit the Corinthian church one final time. And to prepare them for his final visit, he writes the letter we know as 2 Corinthians, his fourth letter to the church. Interesting. By the way, it's hard to, if you just read the letters, it's hard to get all that at first glance. So you do some study, but as you read it, you can kind of see the 4 letters there. Now, the theme, as you see on your program guides, is power and weakness. Okay? And Paul's going to share that as followers of Jesus, we're to walk by faith and not by sight, that it isn't the strong or impressive who have true strength, but he talks about it's those who are weak. So if you're weak, welcome to the club. Because we are those who can find strength in Christ. And when we and those we follow find strength in ourselves, it glorifies ourselves, not God. But those who are weak, it glorifies God. So we're going to see that throughout this letter. It's going to help us as individual followers of Jesus. It's going to hopefully change our view of weakness, help us rely more fully on God, but it's going to also help us to identify faithful leaders, like truly faithful gospel leaders within the church, right? Not ones that appear faithful and aren't, but truly faithful leaders. So it's going to benefit us individually, but I think also collectively, and we need this guidance. So we're going to start off with our very first point in this sermon series. You ready? It's this, that impressive, in quote, like impressive, it attracts and it influences. I think you guys all agree with that statement, right? Things that are impressive are people magnets. Now, some of you call me Unc, and so you think I went to high school like 70 years ago, okay? I went to high school, I graduated in 2012, okay? So not super long ago. That's still not that old, okay? Jeez. Anyway. Wow, well, maybe you guys are just young, all right? Age is relative. To some old, to some young. But let me say this. In 2012, even though it's light years away, we had a thing called, we still drove cars, okay? We still had phones. I know. But when I was in high school, did you just say, was there color? Or was everything in grayscale? Is that what you're asking? Wow, movies were black and white. But wow, I revoke your prize that you get. Just kidding. Now, I remember in high school, I went to a high school in California. It was over 2,200 people, so it was a bigger school. And I remember we had this big parking lot that everyone would park in. Not everyone, but most people. And it was so crazy because it was almost like there was one exit, one place to enter, one place to exit. And at the end of the school day, right, the bell rung and everyone went, they rushed to the parking lot. And it was just like, it felt like a car show every single day after school, where people were bumping their music with their subwoofers, windows down, top down on the car convertible, right, glasses up, all these things. And I never once heard someone say this, bro, did you see that dude's sick 1990 Toyota Corolla? Dude, that thing's so sweet, man. A little bit of rust on there, like, oh yeah. Never once heard that. However, what I did hear a lot was, bro, even though we didn't talk like that, but it was California, so it's like, dude, bro, dude, that was a sick convertible sports car, man. We don't talk like that. Sorry, I'm misrepresenting us. But people were drawn to the big trucks with lift kits. They were drawn to the sports car that was a convertible and shiny with the subwoofers, 10-inch subwoofers in the back. Like, they were drawn to that, not the 1990 Corollas. And these cars, the nice cars, attracted people. They were attracted to it, and it influenced you to feel like you had to have a nice car or else you were behind. You were uncool. I also think of those who were popular in my high school. You guys have that probably in your schools, right? Popular people. Maybe not. And if you are the popular one, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But it's usually those, like those who their physical appearance was more impressive than others. They dressed a certain way. They acted a certain way. Their personalities were bigger. They would from the eye test, we would say they are above average, just in how they carry themselves, all that. There's probably a reason I was never popular. I felt like you're kind of an average Joe or below average, you're not popular. And I fell under one of those two categories. I don't know which, okay? And you don't have to judge if it was average or below average. What was that? I figured you'd say that. But I flew under the radar, lots of kids did, but the popular kids, it felt like they had a lot of influence. Even in a school of 2,000 plus people, like, you knew who the popular kids were, right? They were just impressive people from our eyes, right? And they attracted and influenced others. Now, in our culture, I would say impressive attracts, but I think that's true in a lot of cultures and a lot of centuries, and it was certainly true 2,000 years ago in the Corinthian culture. Impressive attracted and influenced heavily. Now, the city in Corinth, okay, this was a very real city. It was a prime location for trading, because it's not like they just had Amazon Prime, you know. They traded for things, and because of its location, it was this place that was viewed as a location for endless financial possibility, right? If you started with rags, you could have riches. If you had riches, you could get even richer, right? It was this wonderful place in that sense. You could get ahead in life. This city was filled with cults and magic and prostitutes, false gods, theater, athletics, and many other activities. It was a busy, busy city. It was a diverse city. Theater? Did I say that wrong? Oh. It wasn't a bad thing. It was filled with all these things, right? And it was filled with rich people. It was filled with poor people. It was filled with middle-class people. But it had all these things, some good, some bad, mixed deal. But in the end, it was a culture that tried to get ahead, where it was the impressive that rose to the top, the impressive that influenced others. And this is a large reason why Paul wrote 2 Corinthians, because many in that church, they were attracted to and influenced by these false teachers who were impressive. And he sarcastically calls them super, in quotes, super apostles. They weren't real apostles, okay, don't get it twisted. They were false teachers, really charismatic personalities, were very impressive speakers. They dressed well, they were physically and impressive. They were the type of personalities people were just naturally attracted to. If they had a resume, if you've ever filled one of those out or know what that is, it would say something like this. It might say, yeah, master's degree from Harvard University. I'm an award-winning author and public speaker. I have a social media following of 1 million plus people, etc., etc. Now let's pause real quick. None of those things are inherently bad, okay? It's not bad to go to somewhere like Harvard. It's not bad to be educated. It's not bad to be charismatic. It's not bad to dress a certain way. It's not bad to be a good speaker or award-winning author. None of those things are inherently bad. They can be very good things. However, these false teachers were leveraging all of those things that impressed people to build their influence, and in doing so, they were teaching a false gospel, which was drawing people away from the one true gospel, and in doing that, they were building their bank accounts all the while. So it was detrimental to the church. They were preaching this, and this is what Paul wrote in Galatians. He said this, Galatians 1. And this is right to a different church, but he says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. Right? There's only one gospel. You could twist it, you could avoid it, you could deny it, right? But even a twisting of the one true gospel is a deviation from it. There's only one true, pure gospel. And these false teachers were impressive, but they were under the radar, twisting it and distorting it to gain influence and money, and the church was hurting for it. So Paul is writing 2 Corinthians in part to defend his ministry, because these false teachers were attacking Paul because he's not super impressive like them. And he's trying to course correct the Corinthian believers. Now, he does this in part by comparing himself to these super apostles. We just heard what their resume might have looked like. You ready for Paul's resume? Maybe if he was applying for a pastoral job, he might say something like this, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He says, since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. So here's what he's going to boast in. You guys, we all boast at different things, you know. This is what he boasts in. He says, are they servants of Christ, the super apostles? He says, I am a better one. He's like, I'm talking like a madman, because they're forcing me to compare myself. And here it is. Here's his resume. With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, often near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. At night and a day I was adrift at sea. On frequent journeys. Look at how many times he's in danger. In danger from rivers, in danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, dangers from false brothers, in toil and hardship, so many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold, exposure, and apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches, because he cares for the local church. He said, who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to fall, and I am not indignant? If I must boast, here it is, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. What a resume, huh? Now, if there were some churches looking for a new pastor, and they saw the resume of the super apostles, and they saw the resume of the actual apostle, the Apostle Paul, they would probably naturally lean towards the super apostles, right? It's just more impressive, it's more attractive to the eye. By worldly standards, they're impressive dudes, right? And Paul, by worldly standards, is unimpressive. He could have boasted about things like his world-class education. He was an educated man. But he boasted about his sufferings and his weaknesses. Now, if I were to ask you, just think, what will you boast about? And what are you proud of? And you truly took time to think through those questions, I think most of us, if not all of us, would initially think of good things we've either done or good things that we've become. That's where our minds would naturally grow. We bring up something that's impressive about our doing or our being. Now, I don't think many of us would answer those questions. What are you going to boast about? What are you proud of? I don't think many of us would answer with some of our weaknesses, right? I know I wouldn't personally. But here's what's beautiful about what we're going to learn through 2 Corinthians is this. Here's your second point. The gospel changes how we interact with our weaknesses. And as I was studying this week for this message, last week, I'm like, I needed to hear this message. This 2 Corinthians is necessary. Now think about this. All of us, I think, unless you're just super confident, but all of us have something about our bodies that we're probably slightly or a little bit more than slightly self-conscious about. Do you guys agree with that, right? We all have things. Now, at the last church I was a part of, in Vancouver, Washington, I remember there was a summer camp that I was a part of as a leader, and I heard of this girl that went to camp, and she woke up the next morning, and she forgot her makeup at home. Now, normally you might say, oh, that's not a big deal, but for her it was a big deal because she never, ever, ever wanted someone to see her face without any sort of makeup. She was terrified that people would see her for how she really looked. She didn't like the way she looked in the mirror. And I remember she refused to come out of her room because she didn't want any students or adults to see her face, right? Now, you might be self-conscious. Eventually, she came out of the room, just so you know. That's the end of the story. But I know you were, like, on edge. Now, you might be self-conscious about something to that level or not. I don't know, but regardless, whatever you're self-conscious about, I can almost guarantee you don't just live and say, hey, everyone, I'm self-conscious about this. Look at me, right? Look at this one part I'm really concerned about. You probably dress or act a certain way to cover that up so that no one knows about it except you, right? Is that fair? I feel like that's fair. Now, I would say this. We interact with our weaknesses as human beings, as followers of Jesus. I think in a similar way we act towards things that we're self-conscious about, where we're not, like, we don't just boast and show them off, but we try to hide them and conceal them. So here's a really fun exercise. Legitimately, take this moment, and I want you to think about your weaknesses. Okay? Think about where you lack and you're weak. I want you to think in these categories. Where are you weak and lacking physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually? Think about that. Where are you weak in all four of those areas? I've got weaknesses in all four for sure. Now, if I said, hey, after tonight, I want you to go home and write down that list in each of those categories, and I said, hey, do you want to share that next Wednesday on the mic, like before we get into the sermon? I bet you there would be zero. It might be like a small handful, but I doubt it. There'd probably be zero people eager to do that, right? To get on the mic and say, hey, here's our week physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. We just wouldn't do that. The gospel doesn't mean we have to broadcast our weaknesses to the world. But as we'll see in 2 Corinthians, it does mean that we can actually boast in our weaknesses. It means that we can look at that lengthy list of weaknesses we put together, and we don't have to go straight to the paper shredder. We don't have to go straight to the fire and throw it there. We don't have to rip it up or crumple it and throw it away. We can actually look at that list with contentment and be in a sense, have some pride in it and some peace with it and embrace it. This is essentially what Paul did with his weaknesses. So look at 2 Corinthians 12. We'll eventually get to this in the coming months, but he says this. This is like how it changes how we interact with weaknesses. It says, so to keep me, Paul, from being conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities, for when I am weak, that I am strong. Now, this thorn was given in Paul's flesh. We don't know exactly what that was. There's debate on what it was, and we'll get there eventually. But we know what it did. It made him weak, which is why he pleaded to God 3 times. He said, God, can this thorn leave my side? It's making me weak. It's draining me. It's harming me. It's hurting me. God, help me. And God's response, he essentially said, no. I'm not going to remove this. God is sovereign. He could have. But in his providence, he said, no. And the moment God said no, God's response changed how Paul interacted with that thorn in his side. It kept him in a state of weakness, but rather than just trying to ignore the weakness or get rid of it, he embraced it. He embraced it to the extent that he became content with it, and he began to boast in it. The gospel radically changed how Paul interacted with his own weaknesses, and it should radically change how we interact with our own weaknesses. And here's why. Here's your third point. The gospel changes where we find strength. Now notice why Paul was content with weaknesses, why he was content with hardships and insults, persecutions and calamities. I don't know anyone who's just naturally content with those things. Like, hey, I was insulted. I'm so content with that. That's awesome, right? I don't know anyone. Or persecutions. But he was content with these things because when he is weak, then he is strong. Like, doesn't that contradict itself a little bit? Without the gospel, that makes no sense. Like, if you just saw a random guy on the street who's not a believer, and he's like, yeah, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. You're like, dude, you're kind of dumb, right? Like, it makes no sense without the gospel. But with the gospel, it makes sense. Go back to 2 Corinthians 12:9. This was God's response to Paul when he says, God, I'm weak, right? Remove this thing that's making me weak. And God says this, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And then Paul concludes, knowing God, he says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Right? Paul was not weak when he was weak. He was strong when he was weak, because in his weakness, he more fully relied on God. Right? Think about it. It's like, how many of you are genuinely, like, your initial reaction is to be content with your weaknesses, or content when you're insulted? You've all been insulted at some point in your life, right? How many of your initial response was just, oh, I'm so content with that, I'm at peace, that was awesome, right? How many of you are content truly and at peace when you face persecution and hardship? Probably not many of us, if any of us, right? We typically respond to those things with, oh, man, another challenging thing. Can I just get a break? Oh, life's so hard. Can I just get a little light at the end of the tunnel? Or why did this have to happen to me? Or why another thing, right? But these things that happen under the providence of God, they strip away our self-reliance, our self-sufficiency, our self-dependence, and in the world's eyes, that's a shameful place to be, right? Our world promotes strength and being strong and just self-sufficiency, self-dependency, right? And so if those are stripped away in your life and you're relying on someone other than yourself, that's shameful. That's something to be embarrassed about. But the gospel flips that thinking on its head. It tells us and teaches us that when you're in a position of weakness, that's the place you need to be in. That's not a place you need to dig yourself out of. Because in that place, friends, that position of weakness, you will experience the sufficiency of God's grace. Not the sufficiency of yourself, which isn't sufficient at all, but the sufficiency of God's strength. And I would argue personally, this is personal, I'm not saying this is gospel, but personally, one of the most dangerous times for me in being a follower of Jesus has not been during the challenging times in life. It's been during the semi-easy times, when there's not a ton of challenges. So Piper and I, we have owned our home in Big Lake for almost 5 years now. And in those 5 years, we've had a little bit of challenges with our home, just a few. And when all is well with our home and things are working right, it's wonderful. It's like peaceful, it's great. Piper and I it's like we're kind of cruising in certain ways. It's nice. But then when our first year, when the water pipe burst in our laundry room, that was challenging. Then our kitchen flooded. That was challenging. Our roof started to leak. And all those things, when those things happened, Piper and I, we had to get on the phone, and we had to call some people for help. Because we couldn't deal with these things on our own. I'm like, our kitchen is flooded, there's mold everywhere. What are we supposed to, I can't do it myself. We need help, right? It caused us to look to other people for help. And I would say in a similar way, when we follow Jesus and all seems well in life, it's almost like we feel like we're cruising, right? Like we're good. But we have to understand God's grace is not just necessary for our salvation, it's also necessary for our sanctification, for every single step we take in following Jesus. Which means even when life is going well and the roof's not leaking, we still need to rely on God's grace. Always. However, at times, it's not until we begin to experience weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and calamities that we turn to God. God uses those things to strip away self-sufficiency and help us rely more fully on Him. And personally, I'm just speaking for myself, but in this season of life right now, I feel like I'm in a constant state of tired. And you guys know I have 2 little kids, and I'm like, maybe this is just life for the next 18 years till they move out. I don't know. Like, that could be reality. But I feel it, right? Trying to care for my wife, my kids, my home, the church, all those things you try to do. And I find myself often trying to force myself out of this state of being tired and exhausted. Like, I try to force it. But there's a tension, right? there's a tension because I don't want to become a victim of circumstances and say, oh man, everything's just so hard and life stinks and it's like I'm just trying to do so much, look at me and woe is me. I become this victim. But at the same time, I don't want to try to get out of this pit by myself on my own strength. And so on a daily basis, I'm reminded, right? 2 Corinthians has been already helpful for me. It's reminded me that I can actually be content with some of my weaknesses. I can still try to grow and be strong, but not on my own, right? That in this constant state of tired, it's not necessarily in this season a pit that I have to climb out of and get out of. But I can actually sit in that pit for a little bit, because in that pit, I become more reliant upon God. And it doesn't always feel good because I want to be the strong guy and the tough guy and the strong husband, the strong father, the strong pastor. But the reality is I need the Lord, and it's His grace that sustains me. And so when God is our strength, here's the beautiful part. He's the one that sustains us. And when He sustains us, He's the one that gets the glory. He's glorified. These super apostles came into the Corinthian church, were quote-unquote really impressive, because in part, they seem like these really strong, self-reliant, amazing, impressive teachers. But it's in their self-reliance and self-sufficiency that God was not glorified. They were the ones being glorified. It became about them and not Jesus. They didn't act like under-shepherds. They were over the shepherd, which is Jesus. Not good, right? It became about their charisma, their skills, right? Their giftings and their strengths. But when you look at Paul's life, you just see this man who was in a position of weakness, and yet it put him in a position to rely on God's strength, which means when you look at Paul and his leadership, it glorified God. And I would say this, I think you guys would all agree with this, that there are many false teachers in the church today who are impressive, right? It's not bad to impress people, okay? But here's kind of the danger that we live in, that they didn't face back then. We have a thing called the internet. And so we have access to all sorts of teachers that we don't have to live close proximity to. A lot of teachers who on social media are impressive, and they might have a really small following. They might have a huge following or anything in between. I'm not saying it's bad to have a small or big following, right? That's not bad. But we have to walk by faith, 2 Corinthians 5:7, and not by sight. Part of this means living in light of the gospel and following those who do the same. Meaning that we as a people, our leaders and ourselves, we are people characterized by weakness. Not our own strength, but by weakness. And in that, we are people who rely more fully on God to sustain us. So our big idea for tonight is going to be this. And this is kind of a theme, right, throughout 2 Corinthians. But here's the fun idea. Fully embrace your weaknesses so that you are more fully rely upon God. That second part seems nice to me. Like more fully rely upon God. I want that, but I don't like the first part. Fully embrace your weaknesses. But you got to fully embrace those if you're going to more fully rely upon God. And this is a theme, power and weakness, we're going to see throughout this letter. So here's the question, okay? Here's some application. Like, how do you view your weaknesses? Right? Think about those categories I brought up. And when you think about your weaknesses, is it something that you just want to reject? Like, you just say, I don't want to think about it, or if I think about it, I just get it out of my system. Or is it something you want to embrace? For most of us, we probably want to initially reject it. At least that's how I am. I'm wired. But throughout this series, by the end of it, my prayer is that we would look at our weaknesses, and rather than rejecting them, we would embrace them, not begrudgingly, like, oh, I have to just, Jesus says to, but we would embrace them joyfully, right? Not that we seek out weaknesses, but that we know them, we identify them, and we embrace them, knowing that when we are weak, then we are strong, because in that weakness, we rely more fully on God. And we'll talk throughout this series, how do you rely on God? But here's 3 quick ways. Just want to give you some direction here. The first way I would say is do this through prayer, right? A lack of prayer displays in someone's life a state of self-sufficiency, right? If you're never praying or you pray very minimally, then you're probably not depending on God as much as you could. The caveat in this is I've never met someone who says, yeah, I pray enough, right? We can all pray more. So pray. Pray, pray, pray. Make it a habit. Don't rush through your prayers. Sometimes we can pray one-sentence prayers and have quick prayers. That's fine. But you also got to take time to spend time to commune with God in prayer. The second thing is I would say rely on the Spirit. Right? You guys realize as followers of Jesus, the Spirit dwells within us? Like God himself is within us. It's not our own power, right? But God empowers us by his Spirit. And so we can ask God and say, God, your Spirit dwells within me. Empower me, God. Help me. Strengthen me. It's not my own strength, but yours. And then thirdly, rely on the people of God. Right? We experience the help of God through the people of God. God ministers a lot of times to us through us. So ask people to pray for you, right? Share with them what's challenging you. You have leaders here that you can do that with. You have fellow students you can do that with. But don't live in isolation, right? Rely on those around you. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm glad you're here. My prayer is that you will come to this series truly with an open heart and open ears, because there's a lot that you will learn, but what you will learn doesn't just have the ability to change your life now, but your eternity. And that's far more important than anything in the present. And lastly, two more quick things. I want to encourage you guys, next week we'll talk through verses 1 through 11. We'll dive straight into it. And so I want to encourage you to prepare yourself by watching the Bible Project, 2 Corinthians. Okay, it's probably a 7 or 8 minute video. But you can go to BibleProject.com, the Bible Project app, whatever you want to do. Watch that video. It'll give you an overview of the whole book, like the forest, and then we'll get into the trees next week. And then bring a friend. Identify a friend. Say, who do I know who's either a follower of Jesus and is not plugged into a church, or is not a follower of Jesus and needs to hear the gospel? Because they're going to be hearing the gospel these next several months. Okay? So let me pray for us, and then it's 8 o'clock, so we'll hang out, and then next week we'll dive straight into it. Father, we thank you for 2 Corinthians. So used to 1 Corinthians. But thank you for this letter. God, there's power and weakness. And as we learn tonight, we are to fully embrace our weaknesses, Lord, so that we may more fully rely upon you. And that doesn't come naturally to me. It probably doesn't come naturally to most of us. We need your Spirit to help us in that. Lord, I think of Paul when he wanted this thorn removed and you said no. And rather than him being angry and frustrated with you, he was content, Lord. The gospel changed how he viewed and related to his weaknesses, because it changed where he found his strength. And so our culture says, be strong, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, keep on going. But the gospel says, when you're weak, then you are strong. Lord, it's not something that's super impressive in our culture. It's not something we're just going to post on social media, hey, here's all my weaknesses. But help us to understand through a gospel lens, through your word, Lord, that when we are weak, we are strong. Not because of our own strength, but because in that present state of weakness, your grace is sufficient for us, Lord. Help us to taste the sufficiency of your grace every week as we go through this series. We love you, Lord. Thank you for your word. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, friends, that's it. You guys can hang out. North, you can hit some music.